We have some of our freshman assembly members back in our studio today to discuss state lawmaking. That's coming up on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstadt, Cashman Equipment, Valley Electric Association, and additional supporting sponsors.
Welcome, I'm Kipp Ortenburger, and thank you for joining us this week on Nevada Week. Well, back in January, we sat down with 4 newly elected assembly members on the eve of their first legislative session. Now, on that show, we discussed the legislative process, the preparation, their priorities, and then what they collectively hope to accomplish. Well, now, the 80th legislative session is in the books, as they say, and our now seasoned lawmakers are back on Nevada Week to share their insight and their experiences. So please welcome Assemblywoman Shay Baucus, representing District 37, Assemblywoman Melissa Hardy, representing District 22, Assemblyman Glenn Levitt, representing District 23, and Assemblyman Howard Watts, representing District 15. Thank you so much for returning. We really appreciate it. I hope we're all rested. We've got, about 6 weeks, I think, under our belt since the session. And actually, Assemblyman Watts, I want to ask you just that. I mean, what's recovery been like? What's reintegration just back into life after session's been over?
It's been a change of pace for sure. You know, during the legislative session, things kind of get busier and busier and busier, and we had some extremely long days towards the end of the session. So it's definitely nice to come back, although the weather's a bit hotter down here in Las Vegas. And, you know, for me, it's been just picking up as a small business owner, picking up where I left off, getting my things back in order, picking up clients, and trying to get back in kind of the swing of things. But also, you know, our jobs as legislators continue going even though the session's done. We were all just in some training for the interim, so we have committees where we're going to be looking at issues in between the legislative sessions, and our service to constituents and other things is ongoing. So
Assemblywoman Baucus, doesn't sound like there's much of a break, right? We're just right back into the next phase of what your duties are. Is that correct?
I would definitely agree. I'm like Mr. Assemblyman Watts. I also have a small business. I actually had a court hearing the Wednesday right after we got done with session on Monday. So needless to say, I dove right back into my legal practice, and then also constituent services do not stop. So I was getting calls still on my cell phone, what is needed, bills to be passed, and I'm like, oops, we just finished our 120 days. We won't be meeting until 2021 unless we have a special session. But in the interim, the exciting part is we are going to be doing several committees and participating in that on different issues as well.
And back to your other jobs, Assemblyman Levitt, I mean, do you have any time to do any of the work of your regular job, or do you just put that aside and you just go right into the session for 122 days?
Well, I'm in a little unique situation. I work for a government entity, so I'm not allowed to touch any of that work while I'm in session. So I actually take an unpaid leave of absence, and so I don't communicate at all with my employer while I'm at session. But right when I got back, it was, you know, you drop everything on the desk and you have to hit the ground running, because, you know, when you've been somewhere for 10, 11 years, they don't expect you to have any, you know, time to learn anything new. They're going to assume you know what you're doing, and you're going to step right back into that role. And so it was kind of nice. They told us, don't take a vacation right after session's over, and that might sound a little weird to most people, but it's true. Your adrenaline is sky high. I mean, you're really on a high, and you're in productivity mode, and that's the best time to go back to work, is when you're like ready to be in productivity mode. And I think you wouldn't enjoy a vacation to its fullest extent if you had gone right after session, gone on vacation. So yeah. It was kind of nice to go back to work and be in that mode still.
Right. So that's the end of session. Assemblywoman Hardy, let's talk about the beginning of the session then. Okay. I'm curious on what your experience was. Maybe it's the first floor session, but when you kind of have that moment of, here I am, I'm making law, I'm making Nevada history here.
Definitely, the opening day ceremony is very awe-inspiring. I think we can all agree when you walk into that chamber, you know, the press is there, all your family and friends are there, and that moment you stand and raise your hand and take that oath. it becomes real that you are here representing the people that elected you, and you're here to do the work of Nevada. So that was an awe-inspiring moment. For me, it was extra special. I was the daughter of a former speaker, the first daughter to follow in the footsteps of a parent to serve in the assembly. So that was an extra special moment for me to be there and to remember my dad when he served. And also to be part of the first female majority legislature in the entire country. Right. That's something that we will all share and all be a part of a great history. And for me, that feeling never left. Every time you walked into that chamber, I always took a moment to sit and think about, what I was doing there, what my vote meant. That it wasn't about me particularly, it was about our state, our constituents, and that feeling never left me.
Assemblyman Watts, did you have those moments too where you're kind of in the thick of it and you just go, I can't believe this is happening here?
Oh, absolutely.
Making law.
Absolutely. It's an honor. It's awe-inspiring. For me also, when my first bill was kind of passed and I knew that the governor was going to sign it to law, and I was actually able to go for a brief signing ceremony, so I had to duck out from the legislative building and dash across the courtyard in a few spare minutes, and was able to see that official moment when an idea that I had been working on and talking to my colleagues about, and excited when it passes, and then to actually see it signed into law and officially be a lawmaker, that was a really special moment. So.
Assemblyman Levitt, on our previous show, we talked a lot about the training and orientation process that you all went through before the session started. We're going to watch a little clip of that. Please take a look.
If we had not received that training, we would be going up there blind, and we would probably spend at least the first 2 months trying to figure it out.
Right.
And so having that training is so valuable in helping us to hit the ground running a little bit. Now, granted, there's a lot that we have to learn about the dynamics of what happens and personalities, because we don't know all of our fellow legislators like we know each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that the training was so valuable in that aspect that we're able to go and do certain things rather than watch and then do.
So first off, you went up north and came back a man, it looks like, with the facial hair.
Yes, I did notice that. Very, very clean-shaven young man there.
But was it that way? So did the training really play out that way, where it wasn't just watch, you actually went right in and were able to do right away?
No, I totally regret doing the training now because it did nothing. It was actually very valuable, and I think we can all agree on that, because we stepped in on the first day and had some knowledge, had some knowledge of the process that we had to undertake, and it's a daunting process. I mean, you had 6-7 bills you had to put together or coordinate, and it was a daunting process from day one. And if you hadn't had the training walking in, it would have been very difficult to navigate that process.
Yeah, well, and I'd also say, I mean, there's still plenty that we had to learn once we got there in terms of just managing our schedules, working with staff. So you can't cover everything in training, but it's extremely valuable. And also, our freshman class even expanded as we had some other people appointed to fill vacancies. So we really our state can't afford to have a quarter of the legislature walk in with no training or prior to getting involved. So It's vital.
Yeah. Assemblyman Levitt, I don't know how this compares here, but I'm just looking at the amount of bills that you sponsored and co-sponsored. You sponsored 34 as a primary sponsor and 42 as a co-sponsor. That seems like a phenomenal amount. Do you attribute kind of the training, the orientation, to just getting in there and being able to be part of so many bills?
I think it has some to do with it. In greater aspect, it's the relationships that you build. You go through and you build relationships with people, and so you trust that when they bring you a bill that they want you to co-sponsor with them or primary sponsor with them, that what they say about that bill is the truth. And so that's the real key part of it. And I think I kind of pride myself on the relationships that I built with everyone there. Relationships of trust and understanding and knowing, hey, if Howard was going to bring me a bill and this is what he says that bill is about, that when I read through it, I'm not going to be surprised. And so that's very valuable. And yeah, it sounds like a lot of bills, but when you have 2,000 bills that are going through the legislative process, it's not that much. And you also have senators that are bringing you bills to help sponsor as well. So it's both sides of the aisle that are bringing you bills. So
yeah.
It's a good process.
Assemblywoman Baucus, Assemblyman Levitt mentions the relationships, but also the Senate here. What's the relationship of the communication like between Assembly and Senate?
I think that's probably one of the most interesting things that I was not prepared for is even though we're in the same building, the senators are on the second floor and the assembly members' offices are on the third and fourth floor. And so there's times you go and you really don't see the senators. And even probably the most surreal thing that I think people don't realize is that last week of session is pretty crazy. And basically, you have a good idea of all of the bills that have passed out of your house. So for the first portion, all the assembly bills pass, and then you see what Senate bills come through your house and what you're voting on. But the problem is even though we have all of these bills that are sitting over in the Senate, you really don't know, unless there's been a change, what happened to that bill. It could be dead, or it could be going into law. And that was probably a strange thing because there is that division, even though, I mean, I get along with my senator colleagues. It's not about that, but just so much work is happening in two different branches of government. I mean, two different houses of government.
That's interesting. Assemblywoman Hardy, I'm wondering, so when you have a bill go through and it's passed Assembly, the votes happen, it's going to Senate, there isn't a lot of communication there. So I guess it's just a kind of wait and see type of process.
Yeah, so, what happens, the process is, you have the bills that you're sponsoring, and your first priority is to get a hearing for those bills, get them through the committee by the committee passage, and then first House passage, and then the whole process starts over again in the Senate. So that piece of legislation is still your responsibility. So now you have to get a hearing scheduled in the Senate for that committee, get it through the committee. You've got to build support with the senators over there in the committee, and then again, by that second House passage, and then it's got to go through the floor. So you have to build, back to Glenn's point, all along you have to build relationships both with your Assembly colleagues and in the Senate, because you have to have a coalition to get that piece of legislation through. You need people to advocate for it, and you need a majority of members to vote for it so that it passes and can be signed into law. So it's it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Getting a bill through.
And to that point, the amount of work we have here, Assemblyman Watts, day to day, what's it like? I mean, is this a desk job? Are you at your desk revising bills, or are you out talking to your Assembly members?
Well, it does involve a lot of sitting, but I mean, we had committees start at 8 a.m. And you got to be there in advance to get prepared, and then after that, we have committees in the morning. Grab a quick bite to eat, go on the floor. Sometimes that could be 20 or 30 minutes. Sometimes it could be a few hours. And then we'd have, depending on people's schedules, there's a couple of time slots for afternoon committees. And then when you're not doing that, you're having meetings, you're working on bills, you're going to meet with people to try and get support. So you're always working on something, and then usually you're going to be doing something like that even into the after hours. So, it's a job that we're spending 10 to 12 hours on a day, Monday through Friday, sometimes more. Towards the end of the session, I mean, seems like we're putting in 16, 17-hour days,
Yep.
going almost up to midnight, trying to get things through.
And I want to talk about that, Assemblyman Levitt. So we've got the last few weeks of the session. We see all these bills that are being passed. And then we've got really big bills that happen in this session, right? The education funding formula, SB 543, came through. Does that overshadow what some of the smaller bills are trying to get through, or is it a pretty good even balance of moving all of those bills through?
I think yes and no. I think that education bill came so late in session that I think it put a shadow over a lot of bills that we're trying to fight to get done in the later parts of the session. And so I think if it had come a little earlier, it might not have been so much of a hindrance to other bills. But it was timing, right? The timing of it and when it came, because a bill that large, then everyone has to be ultra focused on it because there's 2 weeks left in session. So you have to really know that bill and understand that bill. And so I think a lot of people were a little overwhelmed in the waning weeks of the session just by the sheer number of things that were coming up. And I think it's, and to Assemblyman Watts' point, you don't leave that building. I mean, there was 14, 16 hours where I did not breathe fresh air. It was you took a nap on your couch and you pushed forward, and that was kind of explained to us a little bit before we started, but until you really experience it, there's no way to really describe it effectively.
And I'm sure those last couple weeks especially. And I'm wondering, Assemblywoman Baucus, just the strategy in something like that. So let's go back to just the education funding formula bill. Is that part of the strategy to introduce something like that in the last couple weeks just because it might have a better chance of getting through?
That's so funny because I've actually been pondering that a lot because we're freshmen, so we don't have control over those late numbered 500 bills, but there were quite a few. Some of them are emergency bills, and then there's a lot of funding bills that come through from the money committees. And so you may not be on those committees. Like I wasn't on the education committee where I got to see the education funding formula, but I sat and just because I think that's such a huge priority to our state, especially my constituents care so much about our education and making sure it was properly funded that I took a personal interest and made sure I knew what that bill was about. But the nice thing is we're all in committees where we're dividing and conquering on those thick bills. Like Assemblyman Watts and I serve on judiciary, and so we had the creation of the cannabis board for the governor's office to create this whole board, and that was another 200+ page bill that you're reading and we're digesting in judiciary. So it's not just the funding formula. We're sitting on a lot of those big bills at the end of session. I don't know, to answer you. I did think about it, whether there's some strategy there. I'm not in leadership. I'm a happy freshman, and so I don't know what goes on at that level.
I would just say, I think that it's something, everyone's trying to work on these big issues, but sometimes just based on, especially with the transition in the administration, there's a lot of things that are being worked on, and some of them, came out a little bit later than would be ideal. But there are people that are working on those issues, and then we all work as hard as we can to vet them and take the time that we need to run them all through the process. And one of the things that came up in our most recent interim training is that 58% of the bills that were introduced actually got passed into law. So I think, not every bill makes it as they're being considered and vetted, and they might not be ready. But I think to have 58% of all the bills that are introduced be vetted and move through the process, it shows that we really tried to take the time to look at every single issue that was brought up, get feedback, and if we thought it was ready, to pass it into law.
And also shows it's very reflective of bipartisanship, where we've got both parties that are moving bills forward. If we've got that high of a percentage, and Assemblywoman Hardy, on our previous show, you spoke to the relationship building and really looking across the aisle, and not just with your colleagues as well. And we do have a clip about that too. So let's take a look at that, please.
The most important thing you can do is build relationships, not just with your colleagues here in Clark County, but up north in the rurals. And not just with Republicans, they're pretty much your friends already, but you need to cultivate those relationships with people across the aisle. It's the most important thing that you can do.
So Assemblywoman Hardy, relationship building is very, very important. You are part of the super minority here in the Assembly as a Republican. How was it for you? Was it a challenge to build those relationships, or did it make it easier because of being a super minority?
I would say I would totally agree with what I said in that clip, that it is about relationship building, especially being in the super minority, because we knew going in we needed other people to support our legislation, to listen to our ideas, or we weren't going to get anything accomplished. And so that, I think we made that a priority, to get to know our colleagues, to build relationships, to build friendships, to take them our legislation and say, this is my bill, this is what I'm working on, this is a good piece of legislation, how can we make it better? Let me hear your ideas. And it went both ways. And that was so important, because your bill is just not on an island. It's not up to you to get that through. You've got to have those other people that support it, and especially being in a minority, you definitely need that support. And so that was something that I did from day one, and I know that Glenn did. I think all of us did. We were all on the same floor. We'd share ideas, and we made it a point to do that.
And you notice that just the camaraderie we have here. You guys obviously have great rapport for each other. Assemblyman Watts, I'm just wondering, on the other side of this discussion, that being the supermajority, how do you make sure that the Republican voice is being heard when you're really trying to move some of these bills forward?
Absolutely, and I think, frankly, I think some of it is a little bit overblown. I can think of a bill that I was working on. It actually didn't make it into law, but I brought it to the Government Affairs Committee, which Assemblyman Levitt sits on. He had some questions about it, put together a working group, invited him in to share his thoughts and feedback, and really listen and try and incorporate that. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas and feedback, things that help strengthen bills. And it doesn't matter if it's something that was introduced by a Republican or a Democrat. I think overwhelmingly we all have the same values. We want to improve education. We want to improve life for hardworking Nevada families. We may have differences of opinion on how we get there. There are some big issues that are contentious. But at the end of the day, we put those things to the side, and most of the time we're working together to just get the policy in a good place. And so that was always something that I would do, is reach out and get different perspectives to improve the policy, and it did. And I think my colleagues could always come to me with their ideas as well.
Assemblyman Levitt, one of the areas I know that we're talking about education right here, and I know you had several bills that were proposed actually and sponsored with Assemblywoman Hardy as well on career and technical education and work-based programs that didn't quite make it. When you're looking at education, you're looking from your perspective too, how important is career and technical education and work-based programs? And when you look at maybe the 81st session, do you think those will be more prominently successful?
Well, I hope so, because my view is that career and technical education is something that can save our education system. And not only save our education system, but provide a ready-made workforce for this ongoing construction that's happening in Las Vegas. And so that's why it was vitally important to me, because I thought it tackled two problems at once. It kept kids in school because they were doing something they were interested in, and they were training for a future that may be beyond college. And then it was providing a prequel to a workforce that may be coming online in coming years. And so I hope that it's a strategy that we can all come together on. I know the governor has some ideas about it. He didn't necessarily like mine, but maybe we can come together and come to some agreements, and I can promise you that I will have more legislation down that road, because it is very important, and it's very important to me.
Assemblywoman Baucus, let's look at the 81st session. Let's move forward here, and in doing so, let's also look at the 80th session on maybe some of the things that we didn't cover that maybe we can cover more in the 81st. What is a focus of yours specifically?
That's a really good question. One tip I wanted to add on to your question to Assemblyman Levitt was, one thing I learned coming out of the 80th session, we all have so many good ideas, and one of the biggest struggles is the amount of money. Everything takes money in our state, and we have a pretty slim budget. And so one thing I would know, if you get rid of your fiscal notes, this is just a tip for those coming up into the legislature, you need to let leadership know you've gotten rid of your fiscal notes, and so to be able to move your bills forward. With respect to what I'm looking forward in the 81st session is to build on a lot of good policy that we started in the 80th session. I'm really excited about this new education funding formula, and we're doing it kind of mirrored along with the funding that's going on right now, our archaic like 1960s funding. And I really do hope it is successful and that we're able to build on that. And we're able, this session, record-setting amounts of additional monies found for education. And I think that it has not really been highlighted that much, and money was pinched everywhere and put towards education. So I want to keep building on that. I hope we see some continuous positive changes in our education going forward.
And do you think maybe in the 81st legislative session we could get to where we're supposed to be on the per pupil level with finding money in other places?
I'm not sure what that level is, but I'm hoping we will be able to find something that does adequately provide for our kids in school.
Assemblywoman Hardy, going into second session, how do you envision your role is going to change now that you're no longer a freshman?
Well, like Assemblyman Watts mentioned, now we go into the interim. And so we are just as involved. We'll serve on interim committees. And that now, instead of having, 2 months or something to get your bills that you want to bring to session, now we have a year and a half. And you can use those interim committees to do research, to maybe expand on or do some more, find some other ways that you want to expand on the bills that you previously passed. You can work with other people to come up with ideas, and you have more time to figure out what you want to do and what would work. And personally, I would like to work more about prescription drugs. I passed a bill, AB 141. It's co-sponsored by my colleague, Assemblyman Levitt. And I think that's something, no matter what party you are, no matter how old you are in Nevada, we pay too much for our medications. And so I think whatever we can do to help lower those costs, that's something that I definitely want to work on. There's an interim committee that was established that's going to study the cost of prescription drugs, so I'm hoping to be on that committee and work with some of the other senators and members of the legislature and see how we can bring those costs down.
Great. And we just have about 20 seconds, Assemblywoman Watts, but give us your one key thing you'd like to see move forward in the 81st.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm still committed to working on conservation issues and consumer protection. And so I'm looking forward to diving deeper on some of those and building off the work that I did in the last session.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here for the second time.
Thanks for having us, Kipp.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, as always, for joining our discussion on Nevada Week. We're going to continue this discussion on our Nevada Week Extras, so please visit our website to view this continuing conversation, or watch this episode again, or access resources discussed on the show. Also, if you have a topic or an issue that you'd like us to explore on a future Nevada Week, we would always love to hear from you. So please find us on social media or email us at nevadaweek@vegaspbs.org. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next Nevada Week.